welcome to the NDTV Dialogues, a conversation of ideas. On this episode, I'm very happy to be joined for this conversation by Melinda Gates, Nandita Das, and Dr. Swati Piramal. Thank you all very much for joining us. And Melinda Gates, welcome back to India.
Thank you.
And interestingly, this time your itinerary included a stop at in Jharkhand in a Naxal hit village. Tell us about that, because it was completely undercover. The security forces didn't know about it. It's something which must have challenged you.
Well, I go all over the world to speak with women, and I like to speak with them in their villages and in their homes to understand what life is really like. And what was so incredible about these women in Jharkhand is they had organized themselves into these self-help groups, and their lives had completely changed in the last 10 years. They were talking about, because of farming practices that they'd learned, they were growing new crops, they were getting more money, more livelihood coming into their families. And then they were starting to realize what their rights were and how to go access government services, that is government payments, how to get the ASHA worker working on their behalf with the Anganwadi workers so they were getting more rations for their children. They were so empowered. And as one woman said to me, her name is Sabita, and she said, you know, before we started working together, nobody in my village knew my name. And now everybody knows my name. And she knew how empowered she'd become.
That's really interesting, because especially in a Naxal hit area, you find the most vulnerable in the village, whether it's a woman or a child or somebody who's of a certain caste, is the one who's left out of services. And anyway, getting services as government services that you're talking about, ASHA workers, to these villages is incredibly difficult, caught as they are between Naxal violence and security forces. How does that reality, how did you see that reality coming from outside? I mean, you perhaps may be the first Westerner they've ever seen.
Well, the amazing thing about these women is, as they said, when they band together, and it's not just 10 of them, but it's 20 of them, and they band together with other self-help groups in other villages and clusters, and then they had a federation, when they go to the government and demand services and they know what their rights are, they are incredibly powerful. And if they can't get the services that they're deserving of, they sit quietly and they wait, and they wait, and they wait, and eventually they get the payments that they're due. And so they know the power in community and being there for one another. And they've become so empowered that their husbands are turning to them now and saying, how can you help us get more loans for our families? Their husbands see them differently. Their mother-in-laws see them differently because they've empowered themselves in their community.
Nandita, women leadership, because it's always an interesting, potentially explosive situation in India, because you, on the one hand, you'll have what's called token women leadership, quota women leadership, and the other hand, you'll have instances we've seen on the ground where reservation has actually worked in getting panchayats together, sarpanches together. The Bahu Beti syndrome has actually moved on and led to real change on the ground. Do you see that happening? Do you think these are stories that are being ignored when we're discussing change in women leadership?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've met some of these women sarpanches, and in the beginning they were a rubber stamp. They were asked to sign here, they were asked to do whatever. But gradually they started asking questions, and that's always a beginning of that leadership quality. And they started saying, no, but why have you made me sign on this? I think instead of, let's say, a road, this health center is more important. So gradually, when they start taking charge of their lives, because women have different priorities, they tend to look at sort of, you know, the larger picture. They tend to look at what's right for other households, what's right for children. So out of habit, as you know, that's why they say that you teach something to a woman, she's going to take care of the whole family. So definitely it has impacted, and that's why we're all fighting for this 33% reservation. You know, otherwise, of course, if you're talking of equality, some people say, why do you need reservation? We need reservation to just try and counter these historical wrongs that have just perpetuated forever. And that's why we need to bring some of these women and all of us to have that place so that we have a voice. Because how do you make a tangible change? The fact is, it has to be done politically. So I think, yes, for women leadership, it is important that there is greater participation of women in every strata and, you know, in every field.
In fact, Dr. Piramal, interestingly, as we talk about women in villages and them coming together, we've also seen the same issues come up right at the top in corporate boardrooms, where the whole controversy about where some companies still haven't found even one woman director, some are scrambling around to find a token woman director, and the SEBI is finding some companies. And in your perspective, why do you think this glass ceiling or this discrimination goes from top to bottom? I mean, it's not just India, it happens in America as well, but with your perspective, what do you feel?
Just to cycle back, when this law came, I thought it wasn't the right one, because I thought women should be in companies by merit alone. It was then I found myself on the board of LIC, nominated by the finance minister. I'm a doctor, and then I think I was able to contribute to university boards, fast moving goods boards. I was able to contribute to the wide variety of boards that I did serve on in terms of corporate governance and things. So I really think that, and these were not my own companies, I think that this will foster change as more women do step up to coming on. They're very talented, they're just afraid to come and say that I know everything, but they are immediately able to contribute in terms of, you know, corporate social responsibility, in terms of governance, in terms of you know, shareholder activism, a wide variety of things that people really feel strongly about in companies. I think women are able to put their hands around it and get it changed.
How important is it, Ms. Gates, do you think, to have a woman in charge or women in leadership positions? In America, who knows, we may have a woman standing for US President if Hillary gets the nomination. Do you think that visible change is crucial for it to filter down to the bottom? That, for instance, if you'll have a male politician going and campaigning for votes, you'll find women automatically perhaps shrinking away from raising their demands in a way that they may perhaps empathize with a woman leader. And do you think this whole issue also of a woman having to be different, do you think that actually is true? Like, for instance, in your foundation, do you find that perhaps people tell you things that they may not tell your husband, or that women will automatically identify with you in a way they wouldn't perhaps with your husband?
Well, I think it's important that every society has women in all types of leadership, equally represented. And the reason for that is that when you get women at the top, and you have lots of styles of women leadership, there aren't just one or two or three styles of women, just like there aren't one or two, three styles of men. Men are represented in all styles of leadership in most societies. Women need the same thing, so that a young woman looking up, my daughter who's in college right now, can look up and say, I don't really want to be like that style, but I want to be like that one. Or I see that woman making a huge difference in her corporation, or on this board, or in government, or in a charitable sector. And so they have role models. We also know that women, when they're on corporate boards, Germany just passed a law, in fact, getting more women participation on boards, because we know that companies are more profitable when women are on the boards and represented. And I think even in government, a great example is when you have women in government leaderships, as you said, they make different decisions. They have different priorities. Paid leave is a huge issue in my country. We don't have it at the federal level. And so women struggle then to be able to leave the workforce to take care of their young child the first 2 or 3 months. And yet we make that really difficult on them, instead of saying they should be fully participating in these jobs, and no matter at what time, if they need some time off or their husband needs time off, either one of them ought to be able to take it and do that. But I think women bring those issues forward, and then they help mentor and sponsor women all the way up the way when you have women in leadership roles.
Do you find it ironical that America, in fact, isn't represented very well at all with women in boardrooms? You've had women CEOs fighting for many of these issues you just raised, that America has never had a woman president. So would you actually say that perhaps America needs to also step up to this?
I think America absolutely needs to step up. I don't think we're anywhere close yet. Even in Congress, we're only about 20% women. In this day and age, 20% of women Congress people are women. That doesn't make any sense to me, or corporate boards. And so I think you're getting women speaking up more. I do think at some point having a qualified female president will certainly help. But no, America's not far enough along. We're not nearly far enough along in paid leave. We're one of the worst, actually, in terms of paid leave. So I think as I've traveled the world and seen the issues that women face all over the world, one of the things I've had to do is come back to my own home country and say, well, how far are women really? Have we really broken the glass ceiling? And the answer is we're getting there, but we're not far enough yet.
Do you find it odd that how so many of the issues are actually common, whether you're talking about developed countries, developing countries?
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? I mean, some in fact you'll have one which says, oh, Indian women are so lucky because they're hallowed here, etc. The whole issue of violence against Indian women is often swept under the carpet, or said, oh, it happens in Western countries too. Why don't you look at rape statistics in America? You saw the controversy about the BBC documentary, which people may like or hate, that's their choice. But there was an argument that why do you talk about women being raped in India when it happens all over the world?
It definitely happens all over the world, there's no question, and I don't think we need to get into this competition where it happens more, because maybe it takes different forms, and it is, I mean, even something like domestic violence, in our country we think it's a lower class issue, And actually studies have shown that it's across class. It's just that in the middle and the upper middle class and upper classes we don't talk enough about it. You know, people want to sort of, they shroud it with a kind of a silence. So that's probably even more dangerous. For instance, the rapes that happened in 2012, that was neither the first or the last rape incident, a gang rape incident. You see every day there's something or the other that sort of comes up. In fact, in Delhi it is said that 200% rise in reporting has happened. So that sometimes can be misconstrued as there are just more rape incidents happening. But actually it's good that people are speaking up about it, that there is no sense of shame either in the girl or in the families. That is decreasing. So I think these are, I mean, I did a play called Between the Lines, which is about the inequalities that exist in our kind of class, which is privileged and educated. And when I was doing a screening at Yale, I was there for a fellowship, and I was wondering whether it will really, whether people will relate to it here. Is it because I come from a more patriarchal society? And I was quite surprised to see that they were asking the same questions. It was completely resonating. And it was interesting that one woman got up and she said that while you are asking these questions now, and we have asked them 20 years, you know, in the past, but we are still struggling with the same questions. We may have asked them before, but the difference may be just that now the things that you are raking up, but it doesn't mean we have sorted or that we have got answers to it. So it's a matter of degrees, but definitely it's a universal con job where 50% of world population is serving the other 50%.
Dr. Piramal, just actually taking off from that aspect, this discrimination, the violence, when you look at, because you've dealt so closely with health here, when we look at issues like, we've seen that the healthcare given to women and men differs, that if it's a boy or a girl, a son or a daughter, the son will almost, I think the statistics are almost over 80%, the son would get better healthcare, get better nutrition. This starts literally from the day they're born. How do you deal with that attitude of discrimination when it comes to giving healthcare?
So in gender inequality, we are at the bottom of the table, sadly. Also, we have 42 million missing girls, and these are girls who've been aborted because they're women or because they're girls at the baby stage. And in every sector that you see, maternal mortality, infant mortality, malnutrition or deaths below the age of 5, women are skewed. It's just much more in girls. But I think that having said that, I think that we can do a lot quickly, because we can identify them, we can look at those areas. I was on the plane reading about in my own home state that there were so many girl deaths this year, and I said, why can't we identify where this happened, go quickly with mobile health services, find out where it's malnourished, and really act so that we can segregate it. We work a lot in Naxalite infested areas where no doctor goes, so we've invented a technology called Doctor in a Box. It goes into that village, and remotely we are able to drop maternal mortality by doing the baby delivery remotely. So we can use innovation, we can use technology, we can identify the weak areas. It's a bit like running a company. You know some things are not going so well, you focus on them, and then they get fine after some time. And so I think that using innovation, using technology, quickly identifying the problem is really part of the solution.
It's sometimes the battle between the, say, bureaucracy and private sector. And Ms. Gates, that is a debate in India where more and more we find healthcare is increasingly in the private domain, whether it's in providing medicines, whether it's in terms of hospitals. How do you then deal with diseases which may not make a profit for the manufacturers, as it were? I mean, you'll have talked about malaria drugs, you'll have talked about cheaper medicines, and just Kala Azar, which you'll work with, are really the most basic. So on the one hand, you'll find vaccines coming out overnight for swine flu or diseases perhaps are more urban, but whether it's Japanese encephalitis, whether it's Kala Azar, whether it's malaria, TB, they're ignored.
Right. So vaccines inherently are one of the best investments that you can make in health. For about the equivalent of about $20 United States, you can give the basic vaccinations that children need. And it's why Bill and I are so invested in vaccines, but it has to be thought of as a public good. So why has India had such incredible success wiping out polio? Bill and I go all over the world and talk about India and that it's been polio-free now for 4 years. It's because they strengthened that routine immunization system and they put the polio vaccine through it in a very thorough way. And so one of the things that we're working on with the Indian government, particularly in 2 northern states, UP and Bihar, is how do you strengthen the public health sector For a country to really grow and thrive, you absolutely worldwide have to have a functioning primary healthcare system. The truth is that today, Indians spend almost the most money out of pocket compared to other countries on private healthcare, other countries of their same level of wealth. And that needs to change. You need to get both the private sector, what's working there, working well in the public sector. You need to do good monitoring, good evaluation, have good statistics about what's working in maternal health, and then spread those best practices. If you can get the public health care system working, you won't leave a third of society out. You won't leave out the vulnerable women, the vulnerable children, the tribal communities. You want them to fully participate in society, but you've got to get the primary health care system working for them. And so I think one of the things that India also needs to look at is how much money they're putting into that system. Today it's only about 1% of GDP.
And further cuts in the budget.
That's right. And a country like China is spending 2.9%, or a country like Brazil is spending about 4.1% of GDP, because they know it will fuel their economy to get their public up and running at their public health care system and have a healthy populace. And so I think that's a place that India needs to continue to make investments and make the system more efficient.
So did you bring up this issue of cuts with the health minister?
Absolutely. And both health and finance, right? It comes from both sides. And I think right now with the change that's happened in the budget, I think there's a little bit of confusion about where various pieces get funded, and I think that is still being sorted out.
Not perhaps on this specific Nandita Das, but on this issue perhaps on social issues, health, education, they're seen as, they don't really matter in the road to progress. I think the point Melinda Gates just made, that this is essential for fueling an economy, that somehow in our drive to make India a superpower, we tend to forget about the basics which are needed for that. It's making sure its people are healthy. Do you agree with that kind of, do you agree with that view?
Well, I mean, if you see worldwide, wherever countries have progressed, and we keep taking now China as example, they have done a lot for public health and public education. These are things that have to go hand in hand. We cannot have development at the cost of this, because finally you have the human capital that's going to actually help in that progress that we are talking about. So I think this is imminent. But just to kind of also talk a little bit about what is being said, I think what we are struggling the most with is the mindset towards women. And that is something so fundamental, and it impacts everything. We can talk about policies, we can talk about health, we can talk about education, priorities. Do we feed the son more? Do we let the son go to an English medium and the girl to sort of a Hindi medium or no school at all? All of this stems from, is it sort of lucrative to put money in a girl? How do you value a girl? What is the worth of a girl? And I think till we almost don't shift it, not just from social justice, of course, at a humanitarian, human rights level, but actually see a social good in it. So I think it's almost like seeing what we need to do.
Because it comes out of profit,
not even making it so transactional, but just seeing it as social good. Like when you said that, it's just more profitable to have women on boards. That diversity and having women's opinions on boards is not just the right thing to do, but it's also good for the company. Similarly, if we start seeing it as a social good for the world that we live in, for a society, I think some change might happen. Or it is happening. We are all talking about how to hasten it. Whether we do anything or not, I think change will happen, because women have begun to question. Women have sort of, ruffled feathers, and we are going to hopefully ruffle more and more. But we are all talking about how to hasten this process.
And I think it's even interesting and instructive if you look at other countries like Japan. The Prime Minister there has an enormous effort to try and bring women into the workforce. Not only have they taken care of healthcare and education, but he's trying to bring the women back in because he knows it will spur economic development. So it's both, as you say, women are fundamentally the bedrock of the family and the society. So there's both the moral argument and there's absolutely the financial argument as well in any country that you go to.
Dr. Piramal, how do you find, because interestingly, of course, as Indian women graduate more and more from university, we find that also there's a dramatic dip in their joining the workforce, because for various reasons, whether it's social reasons, family reasons, etc. How do we change that mindset perhaps? You've got educated young women, you've got women who are doing much better than boys, whether it's at the school level, at the university level, but when they get to the working world, it's like, that a door is closed almost.
So I think, we have to accept that women in India do bring up their children. So let's say they're educated, they stop for a while and then they look after their children. And it's companies need to encourage them to come back to the workforce. So, for example, in my company, we had scientists. This issue was big with scientists because they're trained, PhDs, and then they leave. And you are really stuck because they don't think about coming back fast enough. So I let them work from home. I let them do many things, file a patent from their home computer. I did everything I could to get women back to work after they had a baby. And I was happy that our experiment resulted in 50% women scientists. It started with 10, went up to 50. So I think companies should experiment with the economic potential of women. If we can unleash that, I think Melinda talked about it, Nandita talked about it, unleash the economic potential of women in our economy. Our GDP could go up a couple of percentage points by just getting them into the workforce. And so we need better policies, we need better role models of women who come back and even start with working part-time but then graduate to do more. So I think if they juggle it right, really it can be a positive for the economy.